Okay, so imagine you're planning what to make for dinner this week. You look in your fridge and you see that you have most of the ingredients, but you're missing this one specific thing. And you don't usually use this ingredient, but that's what the recipe calls for. So you go to the store, you pick it up.
I'm sorry, what?
So you go to the store, you pick it up, you make your meal, and life's pretty good. But then, oh no! The recipe calls for like 10 grams of salami soppressata, whatever this is, but you bought 150 and you don't know what to do with it. And you almost contemplate throwing away the extras, but then you think of your mom, and she has this look of disapproval on her face because she knows she taught you better than to waste food. So you go to the mirror, you look at yourself in shame, but I tell you to stop. Stop the self-depreciation because I have the answer for you. And it's cheese and onion buns. So these buns are great for using up extra leftover ingredients and perfect for a small snack or a quick breakfast. We'll start out with a basic bread dough. This recipe is super simple. We have 500 grams of bread flour, all-purpose works if you want, 1 teaspoon of salt, 5.5 grams of instant yeast, and 350 milliliters of lukewarm water. To your bowl of flour, add the yeast to one side of the bowl and salt to the other side. Salt and yeast actually used to be good pals, but then they had a falling out back in 1967. No, but really, you'll always want to do this in bread recipes because salt can actually kill yeast. Give it a quick mix with your finger, and then add your lukewarm water gradually. I was gonna do this recipe using a stand mixer, but this time I thought I would try to do it by hand just so I can show you how simple it is. As I mentioned in other videos, the amount of flour and water can vary based on things like temperature and humidity, so hold a little bit of that water back. You can always add more if the dough has trouble coming together. At this point, I'm just trying to mix and stir the ingredients to incorporate all of that loose flour. With a little bit more mixing, you'll see that the dough has come together and it's pretty sticky. If you find the dough is sticking to your hands too much, you can actually wet your hands with a little bit of water and continue to squeeze and mix that dough. Once the dough comes together, we're going to turn it out onto a well-floured surface and start kneading. So what actually is kneading? It's pretty much just working the dough either by hand or machine to create a strong gluten network. See, wheat flour actually has two proteins, glutenin and gliadin. With the addition of water, these two proteins combine to form gluten. By the process of kneading, gluten proteins stretch, realign, and form an elastic network. Basically, as we continue to knead the dough, it becomes more elastic, stretchy, and pliable, which allows us to mold it into different shapes of bread. One of the more efficient ways to knead is what I'm doing right here. You want to take the dough and fold it over onto itself, then use the heel of your palm to push it away from you. And it's as simple as repeating this process over and over again. I'm going slower here to show you the basic steps, and notice that because I'm moving more slowly, the dough is sticking to my hands. If you go faster, then you shouldn't have this issue. But if you do, you can just lightly dust the dough with flour, and it should be fine. You don't need to be precise at all during this process. All that matters is that the dough is continuously being stretched. That's pretty much what a stand mixer does with a dough hook attachment. It's just stretching the dough over and over again. When you begin kneading the dough, it starts off as looking very shaggy, but then it becomes more and more smooth as the gluten develops. Make sure to stop periodically to do window tests, which will tell you how developed your dough is. Take a piece of the dough and stretch it between your fingers. You're looking for the dough to be thin enough to pass light through without the dough tearing. I like to actually hold my dough up against a light source, which lets me see the strands of gluten. See how even though it's pretty thin, I can press my finger against it and it's not going to tear. For a richer and sweeter dough, we might want it to be a little bit more developed than this, but for this less fatty or leaner dough, this is looking pretty good. Take your dough and tuck the ends underneath itself to form a ball, and then put it into a bowl. Cover it with plastic wrap and let it bulk ferment until it's doubled in size. If you have an oven with a bread proofing setting, use that to save yourself some time. The temperature should be between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or 37 to 42 degrees Celsius. You want to make sure that the bowl is covered with plastic so that your dough doesn't dry out in the proofer. It should take somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. While that's proofing, just do a little 1-2 and get yourself some green onions, and then bam, chop them all with one cut. Simple. Okay, so it's been about 45 minutes and the dough is huge now. Just take a look at that before and after. This is due to the yeast in the dough feeding on the sugars and creating carbon dioxide, which expands the dough. At this point, punch the dough to release the excess gas and then turn it out onto a lightly floured work surface. Flatten the dough a little and then grab the ends and fold them into the middle. Flip it over and round it into a ball. Cover it with plastic and let it intermediate proof for about 15 minutes. This resting period will allow us to roll the dough more easily in the next step. Now that the dough is relaxed, sprinkle on a little bit of flour and flatten it out. We're going to roll it out into a thin rectangle, afterwards to which we'll put on the cheese and green onions. To allow the ingredients to stick to the dough better, we could use plain old water, but instead we're going to go all out and brush on a thin layer of melted butter. You can also use olive oil if you want. This is the part where you can get creative and use up those leftover ingredients. For the sake of the video, we're going to go with cheese and onion, so just sprinkle them all over your rectangle. I also bought that soppressata just for this video, so you're dang right I'm going to be throwing that on top too. Other options you could go with include garlic butter and parsley, sun-dried tomato and olives, or cheese and kimchi, just to name a few. Like, if you want to go with peanut butter and squid, I'm not going to tell you no. Just make sure whatever you use is chopped up into small pieces. This dough works best with savory ingredients, but if you want to use sweet ingredients, I would use cinnamon bun dough or a challah dough. I go over how to make that in my previous video on butterfly babka, and I'll put a card on screen if you want to check that out. If you have extra melted butter, you can just go ahead and pour the rest of that onto everything else. With all your pieces assembled, you can now fold the dough over on top of itself. This doesn't need to be precise at all, because we're going to put the dough onto a cutting board and use a bench scraper or a knife to chop everything into tiny pieces. Just keep chopping and folding, and eventually it'll all come together to become one giant mass. Get yourself a pre-greased muffin tin and a weighing scale, and you can start to portion out about 60 grams of the dough into the holes to make buns. After about 12 buns, I had something like 500 grams of dough left. You can continue to make more buns, but I actually decided to turn it into a loaf. For the loaf, you want the weight to be between 450 to 500 grams. Place it into a pre-greased loaf tin and pat it down slightly to fill up the empty spaces. Cover both with plastic wrap and give the doughs a final proof. Again, use the proof setting on your oven if you have it. You want this dough to be doubled in size, which took around 1 hour for me at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. During this time, you can preheat your oven to 400. The dough will be ready when you poke it and the indent remains. Once they're good to go, put them into the oven. You can put both of them in at the same time because they bake at the same temperature. You just need to make sure to take the buns out earlier. The buns will be ready in about 20 to 25 minutes, and the loaf will be done after 40 to 45 minutes. And then... there you have it. Cheese and onion buns and a cheese loaf. Slightly crispy on the outside and soft and chewy on the inside. This is great when it's still warm because of all those melted cheesy bits. Just take a look at that cross-section. They're great served alongside a hot bowl of soup or just by themselves. The next day, heat it in the microwave for like 15 seconds and use it with your favorite dipping sauce. Thanks for watching! If you have any suggestions as to what you want to see next, make sure to leave a comment down below. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you want to see future videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.